So the first thing that I actually want to do when I am going to make my tables for categorical data, so I did some of the practice with selecting right there, is I actually want to select my entire data set. Now that seems a little weird to do at first if I only want to focus on something like hair color or eye color, but as you will see, the tool that we are going to be using to construct our tables, it will actually work a lot better if we have all of the data selected. Okay, so it's like a little bit more complicated at first to make something a little bit easier later on when we start, especially once we start creating two-way tables. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, and the way I'm going to select everything in the whole entire data set is I'm going to start up here in that A1 cell up at the corner. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way to the last row, or last column, which is O. I'm going to go down to the last entry, which is this math 120 entry down at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is before I click it, and that's always what the hardest part is, people just want to click before I click it, I'm going to hold down the shift key and then I'm going to click. Okay, so and now I'm going to let everything go. My hands are off of everything. Okay, so notice what I just did. I selected everything starting from A1 going down to the O22, which is the last item in our data set. Okay, so I have everything selected. Okay, so first I am going to go ahead and I'm going to make the table first. Okay, and the tool that we're going to use to make our tables, okay, is going to be something called a pivot table. Okay, now pivot tables, if you actually do a Google search for a pivot table, you're going to find out pivot tables are like serious business. Like you can do so much stuff with pivot tables. I honestly don't know all the things you can do with a pivot table, but it's actually one of the most powerful tools in Excel and in Google Sheets. But what we are going to do is actually pretty simple, okay, using this pivot tool. We're going to use some of the baby functions there, some of the entry display things, okay? And so the way that we're going to access that pivot table is we're going to go to the data toolbar, okay? So you kind of want to write this down. And then I'm going to click on the data, okay? And then if you go down, you should see pivot table as one of the options, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Now, what you should see is, or when you're doing this yourself, you should see the data range that you just selected. And once again, this is just telling us that we have this particular sheet. It starts at A1 and goes down to O22. That's how all the cells are selected. And by default, okay, the way that pivot tables are created is they're usually created in a separate sheet, a separate tab, basically. And for our purposes, though, our pivot tables aren't going to be complicated enough that they're going to need their own sheet. But like I told you, this is such a powerful tool that you will see that you know, if you look online for pivot table examples, you're going to see people do some amazing, like huge whole sheet kind of summaries that can do all kinds of computations. It's actually quite amazing. And like I say, I don't really know exactly how to use every single function here. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to select everything. Okay. And then we're going to go to data and then pivot table. Okay. And now what we're going to do is instead of starting a new sheet, we're going to start with our existing sheet. And so this is basically the program asking us, where do you want to put this table that we're making? Okay. So the way I tell it where I want to put it is I'm going to select existing sheet, and then this little 4 squared box at the corner, I'm going to click it. And then I'm going to click in any blank space. So maybe over here. Okay. Doesn't matter exactly where you put it. It will just be somewhere that is empty and has space for this table. Okay. And once that is selected, you're just going to click create. Okay, cool. So now that I have that row and values created, I have this little beginning of a table, I need to basically tell it what I want it to make a table of, okay? And so what we're going to do is down here, we're not going to do any of these suggestions. Although, like I say, Google's always trying to guess what you want to do. Sometimes it gets it right. A lot of times it doesn't. We're going to go to the rows thing right here. And when I go to add, I want you to notice I click on add, and what I'm getting here are all of the labels at the top of each variable. Okay, and in this case, those labels are basically the questions that were asked for that particular variable, response. So for our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and look at eye color, okay? And I'm going to select that. And now I want you to notice, now that I have that eye color selected for the rows, now the rows are populated with the labels that we had. So if you remember, we only had people who had brown eyes, people who had green eyes, and people who had hazel eyes. Okay, and so I have now all the labels right here. Now, believe me, this doesn't seem impressive right now, but I will tell you that when you're looking at something that has 1,000 rows in it, you aren't going to want to like look at those 1,000 rows and try to deduce what all the labels are, because like I said, you'll leave something out, and this does it automatically. Okay, so it looks like we're halfway to something that looks like a frequency table. So if you remember, we had one column that was the labels, okay, in this case the eye color, and then our second column was supposed to be the frequencies. So the way that we're going to get the frequencies to be filled out is we are going to go down, we're going to skip over the columns there, and we're going to go down to the values, option down here. And then I'm going to go ahead and click add. And then I'm going to go ahead and select eye color again. Okay. And then I'm going to look over here, and there's a few things I can do right here, but by default, it should be summarized by count. So if I go here and I select summarize by count right there, and then show as default, what you will see in the second column right there is basically all 16, all of the items counted up. Okay, so if you remember yesterday, we actually did this, and we did get 16 people with brown eyes. We had one person with green eyes, and then 4 people with hazel eyes. Okay. All right, and notice that it also created a total row, and that total row basically added up all those individuals. And if you remember, we only had 21 people in this smaller data set. Okay. Any questions on that before I move on? And please post it in the chat, but don't make it a direct message. It's better if everybody sees the question. Okay. If there's no questions about that, that's awesome. Okay. So this is our frequency table. And the next thing I want to show you is how to take this table and now make our bar chart. Okay. So this table here has everything summarized. Okay. What I'm going to do to create my chart is I'm going to go ahead and take this table, and I'm going to select, starting from eye color, down to this 4. Now notice I am not selecting the grand total row. And the reason I'm not selecting the grand total row is that what you're going to find is that the chart program, or the chart function on this particular program is really stupid. And what I mean by it being really stupid is if you highlight the grand total row, okay, what the chart maker will think is, hey, you have a eye color called grand total. And it will basically just make an extra bar that is marked grand total, just like it was just another one of the eye colors. Okay, and so the chart thing does not know that that's like a summary. So we do not want to select that row, but we want to select everything else, including those headers up here. Okay, so now that I have that selected, now I'm actually ready to make my chart. Okay, and I've really done the hard work already, so this isn't really the difficult part. So either I'm going to click on this little thing that looks like a bar chart, so that's actually kind of nice that they made the icon like a bar chart, or I can go to Insert and then down to Chart. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, bunk. All right, so there, it just inserted a chart. And like always, Google is like trying to guess what I want. It's like basically, you know, jumping the gun and saying, well, you have this data here, or you have this summary, you have this frequency table, you must want a pie chart. And you know what? I will be perfectly honest in saying that a pie chart actually is a pretty good way of summarizing this variable. I can really clearly tell that the highest proportion there is people who had brown eyes and not green eyes or hazel eyes. Okay, so that's actually, you know, to be honest with you, this eye color, this pie chart is not a horrible guess at what to do. But for our purposes, we want to make a bar chart. Okay, now I'm going to apologize for this right up off the from the jump. Us statisticians are really bad at consolidating on one term. And so what you're going to find, and it's going to be super frustrating, is that things that are called something in the book might have a different title when you're in Excel, okay? Or it might have a different title in another program we use, like maybe like CodeApp or something like that, okay? So our book calls that chart we created yesterday a bar chart. So I'm going to go over here to the chart type. Okay, so it guessed I wanted a pie chart. That's not really what I want. Now, if you look over here for what's suggested, it has a couple of options. Now, it has one called bar chart. But if you notice, the bar chart one is like horizontal, and we tend to do our vertical bars. So what we need to select is column chart. So if you notice, it has a nice little picture. It looks like that. So a column chart is actually what we're looking for when we're looking for a bar chart. It's not that what they call bar chart is not a bar chart. It's just, you know, slight differences in terminology, and I apologize for that. So I'm going to go ahead and select column chart. Okay. And I am basically there. Okay. I have, you know, a functional beginning to a nice bar chart. Okay. So it actually created my little bar chart here. You can tell that it is a little bit above 15, that this is a little bit above 0, and that this is close to 5. Okay. Now, I might want to change some things about this because there are some issues with what I've created right here, namely in the labeling, the title. The title count A of eye color question mark versus eye color question mark. I don't think that that's a very illustrative title. So we're often going to have to change the title from what the default was stating. So how do I change the title? Well, basically, when I want to change something, the basic way I'm going to change it is by clicking on it or double clicking on it. And generally, when I double click on it, I will get the option to change it. So I can go ahead and change it right now. So this is eye color of math 190/200 students. Okay. Now that is a much better description, okay? Now, other weird things that kind of came up was this count A of eye color. I don't really think that that's very descriptive. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that and try to type in something that I think is more descriptive. So one thing I can put there is frequency. Another thing I can put there is count, okay? Or if I'm really wanting to be like very descriptive, I could actually put what this really is. This is number of students. right? So the frequency here, the individuals in my sample are students, right? So the vertical scale is telling us how many students are in each category. I also might want to change this from eye color, take off the question mark, because I think that's a little weird. Okay. All right. There. Now I have what really looks like a pretty decent chart. Okay. There is probably only one more thing that I might want to change. Okay. And probably the last thing I might want to change is this vertical scale right here. Okay. And the way that I'm going to change this is by clicking on this main base. And you'll see over here on the customize where it says grid lines and ticks. I can change the scaling for that vertical axis by changing the step value, the major step value. So right now it's set at 5. If I set it at 2, I think I get a much easier to read chart. Another thing I might change is in the vertical axes, I might change how high the numbers go. Here it stops at 16. I might want it to stop at, say, 20 or something like that, or 18 or something like that, just to give it a little bit more headroom. So this is this is our spreadsheet here that has all the responses. I've cleaned it up a little bit since the last you've seen it. I've kind of normalized some of the responses so that they're easier to categorize, later on when we do more work. So don't think that I've like censored anything here. I've just taken responses and I've kind of made them a little bit more regular. So that when we actually go to do some comparisons later on, we can do it a little bit easier without having to accommodate for kind of different ways that people do the response. Okay, so if you remember, and this is what I meant by uniformity. I like techniques, and sometimes there are techniques that actually take a little bit more work. But I kind of like techniques where you're doing the exact same thing every time you're posed a problem, and that you're only making small modifications to the thing to produce different results. And so the strategy I'm going to take is going to follow pretty much the exact same strategy that we had earlier when we were trying to summarize a single categorical variable. Namely, we're going to make a pivot table. Okay. And the way that we make a pivot table, and this is our general plan whenever we're working with categorical data, whenever we make a pivot table, the easiest thing that we will do is, or sorry, not the easiest thing, but the general thing that we like to do is select the entire data set. And it's not absolutely required, I will tell you that right off the bat, but this is something that I think makes it easier, because you're just basically, no matter what you're doing, you do the exact same thing. We're going to highlight the entirety of the data, and then we're going to go to data again and hit pivot table. I wonder why. There you go. Going to hit pivot table. And I'm going to, once again, insert my pivot table into some blank spot in my spreadsheet. I'm going to go ahead and put it right here. Now notice here, I can with my scroll wheel, I can move around. Okay. And so I can move around to find a blank spot. I don't have to stay exactly where I am. To select the entirety of the data set, so Griselda asked about holding shift. That is just the way that, let me go ahead and hold on and hit that right there, just to get it laid out. When I was doing the original selection of the entirety of the data set, and I started here at that top corner, and I go down to the bottom corner, this is the place where I'm holding shift. And remember, all holding shift does is it makes it so that the computer goes, okay, I want to highlight everything between where you first clicked and where you second clicked. Okay. And in the case of when you do it kind of diagonally like that, it takes everything like in a big rectangle. Okay. That goes across that. Eli, what question you have? What's up?
Hey, good morning, Professor.
Yeah, no worries.
I don't know if it's my laptop, but do I have your permission to copy and paste this and put it onto my own slide because when I work on this slide personally, where everyone else is on, it moves really slow and it's laggy. Is that okay with you? Just so I can practice at least?
Yeah. That's not a problem at all. Yeah, no worries at all. I just mostly do the common document so that I can kind of monitor, most of what people are doing.
Right, right, right.
That way I can help people more than if they're because when you're working on your own doc, like I have no insight into it. I don't work at Google. I can't like spy on you. That's their
Yeah.
job. And so yeah, all you have to do is you don't even have to copy and paste. Just go to File and make a copy, and that will split off an entire version of the doc that you can edit.
All right, I appreciate it, Professor. Obviously, if I have any questions, I obviously still ask you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries. All right, so now that we're looking at this, we have this pivot table, okay? And what we are going to do is essentially break down the data that we have into rows and columns. Hey, Tatiana.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So as we're all on this page, on this this graph, the document you had us open up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it, are are you expecting us right now? Like everybody's supposed to be doing something individually on there, or are we just watching and listening to you right now?
Right now, the basic pattern is I'm going to kind of demonstrate it once and then open things up to practice. Although
Okay.
today, since we are like it's the super short day, I wanted to probably do a little bit more just demonstration today, and your practice is actually going to be
Hmm.
on an assignment. Okay, so
Okay.
yeah, so you're mostly just watching right now. I gave you the
Okay.
link to I
Thank you.
gave you the link to it just because I don't know. I think some people might see it better if they have it just pulled up in their own web browser versus watching it over Zoom.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
no worries. All right, so now we have this right here, and our whole goal here is to produce that two-way table. And the way you do the rows and the columns doesn't technically matter, okay? But when we are doing our graph, okay, I want to point out one thing over here. When we go to do our graph, okay, I want you to note that the columns, okay, the columns here end up being how these are broken down, and the rows are the labels along the x-axis, okay? So what we will tend to do is we want the rows to be that variable that we are looking at the response of. And what that means is basically here we're looking at the love of mathematics. That's what we want to focus on, okay? And so that I want to be the rows, and then the columns want to be the two groups that we are comparing to each other. Okay? So here the behavior that I want to see, or the behavior that I'm looking at, is the love of math. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that right there. So this is the thing I want to know. Do students love math? Now, because I want to compare the genders on that particular question, I'm going to put the gender question as my columns. So the rows are the thing that you would like to observe. We generally call this a response variable if we're putting terms on it. And the two groups that we want to compare, that tends to be the columns. Okay, so since I want to compare the genders, they're going to be columns, and the other variable will be the rows. It's not that the information ends up being wrong. This just produces the best visual for looking at what we want to look at. Okay, now got this. Perfect. Now I need some values. I need some numbers in there. And we're going to put values into this table exactly like how we did earlier by just selecting one of the variables. Now, what I tend to do is I like to select whatever I selected for the rows. So in this case, we were looking at do you love math? And so that's right there. Okay. Now, before I move on, does anybody have any questions about this process of making the two-way table and anything of that sort? Okay. So now here comes the question is like, okay, so how do I turn this into a visualization? Well, if you remember, the way we made it into the actual bar chart, which actually Google Sheets calls a column chart, I'm so sorry about that, is that we highlighted the table, right? And then selected insert chart. And I want to ask everybody though, when we highlighted the table, we tried to avoid something. Can somebody tell me in the chat, like what were we trying to avoid highlighting? Like we didn't just highlight the whole damn table and hit insert chart.
The grand total.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The grand totals. And now with this, we actually have multiple grand totals that we have to avoid. So we do not want to be including this row down at the bottom, and we don't want to be including this column. So we really just want to be including everything from there. I'm going to hold down Shift and to there. So notice what I'm highlighting from here down to here. So we have everything from the Do You Love Math corner up there and then down to the 5. And now that we have that, when I go to insert chart, once again, it's going to make a guess as to kind of how this works. And actually, when it has the two-way table, it actually does a better guess than the single one. It actually produced exactly what I was looking for, the column chart.